Welcome to the PFP podcast from the Personal Finance Society, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of personal finance. I'm Tim Groves, Professional Communities and Engagement Manager at the Chartered Insurance Institute. Today, I'm genuinely excited because I'm joined by someone whose work has had a huge impact on how many of us think about our well-being, on burnout and the rhythm of our lives. Dr Stephanie Fitzgerald is a chartered clinical psychologist, a neuropsychologist and associate fellow of the British Psychological Society. So we're going to talk about the inspiration behind the book, the science and the psychology behind winter well-being, and most importantly, some simple practices that we can all adopt right now as the days draw in. Welcome, Stephanie, and thank you so much again for joining us for another one of our CII podcasts. So obviously today we're going to be talking a little bit about your latest book, The Gift of Winter. And obviously the book talks about some of your own personal experiences, which I thought would be really good to start with, actually, if that's okay. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how your own experiences of winter seasonal affective disorder, how they shaped the direction of your work.
Yeah, very much so. So my seasonal affective disorder was a really interesting one for me because as a psychologist and as a neuropsychologist, you'd think if there was anything going on in my brain, I would be the first to know about it. And actually, it took me years to realize that I had SAD. So I probably, like all of us, I had a couple of winters that were a bit rough and I blamed it on, cold and flu season or busy times at work or, things being a bit hectic, festive chaos, all that sort of stuff. And I just sort of bumbled through them, didn't think too much of it. And then I had one year where I had quite a number of life events, which included a bereavement. So when I felt very sad and low that winter, I just thought, oh, it's because life is a bit sad at the moment. And then when I felt a bit sad the following year and I really started to feel quite low in mood, I thought, oh, it's because it's been a year and I'm sort of remembering these events. And then when I was sad the following year, I thought maybe there's something else going on here. And like all great healthcare professionals, I completely ignored it. I did nothing about it. I focused on everyone else's health. And then I eventually got asked to edit a journal paper, which was about seasonal affective disorder. And the best way I can describe it is it read like a bingo card of my brain. And very sadly, I had a full house. And so I had this moment of, oh, that's why I'm struggling. And really what I learned was how to manage my seasonal affective disorder. So the treatments that I use are non-invasive. So they involve things like light therapy and vitamin D supplementation, these sorts of things. So very non-invasive treatments. But once my SAD was under control, I realized that wasn't my challenge with winter. I realized I was just doing winter badly. I was rushing into winter with my summer diet, energy, routine expectations, and then wondering why winter felt hard. And then the more I looked around and the more I spoke to people in clinic who struggled at that time of year, I realized actually we're all a bit prone to doing winter badly. And the reason why I wrote the book is because since I've managed winter differently, since I've engaged with the season differently, it's now become my favorite season. And I think if you'd have said that to 20-something Steph, she'd have laughed because she was busy being miserable and hating winter and dreading it. And I really wanted to offer people a way to enjoy rather than endure this season because so many of us will have already muttered the words, oh, I hate winter. And I just think it's better for our mindset and for our mental health to find a way to uncover these gifts of winter, that the season arrives laden with gifts. And it's so easy to push past and ignore them and just eyes down, head down, get on with daily life. But actually, when we engage with winter, we really do uncover this sort of seasonal warmth, which lies in our coldest season.
Yeah, and I think over the last few years, you hear more and more about the SAD or SAD, as it sometimes is talked about. And I think there's still people that are unsure, is it real? What happens? So could you explain what benefits do we get from the summer season, from the weather? What does the sun and the extra light do to our biology that we don't get in the winter?
Yeah, it's a really good way to look at it, actually, to sort of compare the two extremes. Because if you think about the daylight that's available to us and what that's doing for us, it's effectively supporting our energy levels and it's changing our sleep patterns and it's changing our response to the environment around us. So that can range from everything from your immune system to how well and how deeply you're going to sleep at night, to how quickly you're metabolizing food. So there are all kinds of impacts that can happen. But I think also in summer, when we eat seasonally, the diets that we consume in summer is quite high energy. So, lots of fruits, lots of salads, lots of sort of quick access vitamins, lots of slightly higher sugar food. Whereas in winter, we can fall back on the beige and the slightly less healthy. And, it's very tempting to just grab something quick and easy because we don't want to be out shopping for too long because it's a bit cold and it's a bit dark. So we tend to rely more on sort of comfort food and that sort of thing. So living seasonally and embracing the routines of winter versus summer is all about tuning into that. Am I eating seasonally? Am I utilizing the daylight I have? So today, as we're recording this, it's a beautiful blue sky sunshine sort of day, but we don't associate this weather with winter at all. We associate this weather with summer. And yet actually winter can be one of our driest seasons. And it can be the one where we can experience some of the most vibrant sunrises, sunsets, the most beautiful blue sky, the most sunshine. But what we don't get is the warmth. And so I think that invitation to be outside can feel as though it's gone away, whereas actually the invitation's there. We just need to wrap up a little bit warmer to appreciate it.
And I suppose there's things like when it's dark and cold of an evening, like in the summer, if it's light till 10, there's more likelihood I might go out and see a friend or meet someone out or go and, I don't know, my nan, for example, I go and have a good chat with someone and you get that oxytocin, maybe the chemicals that you get from engaging with other people. I guess there's less of that as well. Plus, I suppose we don't get out as much as well, do we? Because it's dark. So we don't have as much time to go for a walk in the evening and see a bit more of nature because we're at work all day. Before work, it's too dark. After work, it's too dark. And the weekend, if you're lucky enough to have enough free time, after being a parent, looking after the house and everything else, you've got to try and catch up on, I suppose. It is tricky, yeah. So let's dive into the core ideas in the book then about reframing winter. Most people will associate winter with low mood and lack of motivation. So how do we help people reframe it then? What's the key messages that you can share with that?
So I think for me, there are a couple of things that make a big difference in terms of our mindset around winter. So one of them is to really separate out autumn and winter, because it can kind of form this homogenous blob. And we just sort of see as soon as it starts getting dark. So from October, you'll hear people say, oh, I hate winter. And there's just this little voice in my head that goes, it's not winter yet. So winter solstice happens on the 22nd of December. So if we were to view that as the starting point of winter, then actually you've got October, November, December as autumn, and then the very last bit of December, January, February, March as winter. And I think if we make that adjustment in our mindset, we buy ourselves more time, because what can happen is we get so focused on the 1st of January and we get so caught up on, right, new year, I'm ready for a new season. It's Q1, everything is around sort of starting again, starting afresh. And we put that pressure on ourselves. And nothing in nature is there to support us for these, rigorous New Year's resolutions. And I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to do this. The season around us is encouraging us to settle into what I call the hush. It's this quieter, more reflective time. And you mentioned there about, going out and socializing and seeing people. Winter is a season that encourages us to have closer one-to-one connections. And yet we don't. We have big noisy Christmas gatherings and we have office parties and we have New Year's Eve and we have all these sort of celebrations. But actually what winter is encouraging us to do and what our brains are seeking is close connection. And that's because back in the day, if I put it that way, summer would have been a time when we all lived in clans. Summer was the time to travel to big festivals and get together with big gatherings and meet with other clans. And winter would have been a time for cozy fireside chats. It would have been too dangerous and treacherous to travel in winter. And so what our brain is equipped to do is share knowledge and share stories and have that very close connection and bonding with other humans around us. And so what we tend to do is not do anything because, it's cold and dark. So yeah, let's meet up in spring. But we can't have full hearts if we have empty calendars. And so I think it's really important that people do book in meaningful connection, but it doesn't need to be a great big noisy party. It could just be meeting a friend for a cup of tea or going for a wintry walk, wrapping up really warm and holding your mug of hot chocolate as you walk around, whatever it is. But there's something about that very cozy connection that I think is so important. And as I say, when we miss that opportunity, we're missing out on all the benefits. And as you say, the oxytocin, the feel-good factor that can happen for us when we don't prioritize those connections. So it's a really important part of the season, I think.
And I always think it's really interesting when you take it back to how we've evolved and you talk about what we've done throughout our history, and makes a lot more sense as to why we feel and the impact it has on us now. And this is a bit of an odd side point, but I always remember that throughout my life, whenever I've got into a relationship with someone, actually, the winter ones always seem to be the nice time to meet someone because it is that cozy time. And like you said, you probably appreciate that.
No, it's very true. It's very true. I mean, there's a lot of research that would say you're more likely to have close contact, close connections. You're more likely to prioritize those in winter, whereas in summer, it's more of a time for those more surface level, so going to festivals, meeting strangers, just having a drink in a beer garden whilst the football's on, whatever it is. It tends to be lighter surface level interaction because that's what we're encouraged to do. Whereas winter, absolutely, it makes sense that you could have a deeper, closer connection if you're having a one-on-one conversation than if you're in a big, noisy crowd.
There you go. For anyone that was wondering why sometimes dating is better in the winter than summer for anyone out there. So this question, you might have already answered part of it, really. How do people find the balance between healthy rest and then avoiding that feeling that they're hibernating and almost feeling a bit stuck indoors? Can you sort of offer anything for that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think as human beings, it's really tempting to look at creatures who hibernate and think, oh, that's tempting. Like I'll just have a big meal and I'll sleep for months and that will be amazing and I'll feel fantastic. But obviously we don't hibernate. But I think one of the things that we get wrong about winter is we associate it with a season of nothing. So often people will describe winter as a dead, barren, fallow season. There's nothing that happens. And A, that's quite depressing to think about. But B, it's not true. So if you look, for example, in your garden or in your local park or in the nature around you, all throughout winter, there is growth happening. And nature is busy at work, but it is gentle growth. It is not big, loud, noisy, ta-da kind of blooms that come out in spring because they blossom later, but they grow over winter. They don't just appear overnight because it's spring. All that gentle development and growth has happened throughout winter. And so I talk about this thrum of energy that runs through the season. And I think if we can tune into winter energy and find a way to connect with that gentle, deliberate growth rather than all or nothing. So rather than the new year, new me, new year's resolutions, and then, oh, well, nothing worked, so I just won't do anything. Actually, winter is a really good season for the planning and prepping stage. So I always say to people in a slightly controversial statement that a tax year could make you happier. And what I mean by that is if you see the start of your year, even just as a mindset shift, doesn't need to be anything more formal than that. But if you can imagine that your new year, new you type goals start on the 1st of April rather than the 1st of January, you've just bought yourself an extra 3 months to do the planning, put the systems in place, really reflect and think about what you want to do, regain your energy, rebalance yourself before you rush into this new goal or objective or whatever it is that you want to do. And I really think businesses would benefit from that as well. So instead of rushing in with Q1, like, right, here we go, Q1 planning, let's go, go, go. If they treated Q1 as their planning phase and then Q2 and 3 is the execution of those plans, actually, I think we'd have a lot more behind us to support the achievement of those goals. But certainly from a personal perspective, if you can use those extra 3 months you've gained by that mindset shift of actually my new year starts on the 1st of April, then what you can do is put the plans in place, build the systems, gather the resources, regain your energy, kind of replenish yourself so that you are ready to begin rather than start them in totally the wrong season when nature is not working with you to try something new and noisy and kind of chaotic. It's encouraging you to settle into the hush and to think and to plan and to plot. And then once you've done that bit, then you can start again. So it is an odd statement, but I do genuinely think a tax year can make us happier.
I think that's really interesting, actually. And I wonder if there are any companies out there, some of these entrepreneurial companies like Google and Apple. I can imagine those are the kind of things that actually are probably already adopted. Really interesting. And I really love what you were just saying then about what growth goes on underneath that you don't see. And that can apply to us as well, couldn't it, really, actually? It's not always visible in nature within ourselves, but actually there's growing going on all the time. Sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's slower. I really like that. Yeah, that's some really thought-provoking stuff there that we could talk about for ages as well. So in the book, you encourage reflection and foundation building at this time of year. So do you have any favorite prompts or rituals that you could recommend and that maybe some of our listeners might be able to try?
Yeah. So for me, the reflection that takes place sort of during the dark months, it's really important that there's some direction to it. And what I mean by that is it's very easy for our brains to get caught in a bit of a cycle at this time of year. So they just ruminate and they go over and over and over things. And that can be positive things, but sometimes it could be negative things. And that's because our brains aren't really designed to problem solve in the dark. So winter can be a season where you're having imaginary arguments with someone in the shower, or, you're recalling a conversation or a meeting from 4 years ago and you're like, oh, I wish I'd said that. And of course that can happen at any time of year. But I think because it's a slightly more introspective season, we're more prone to sort of bringing those things up. And the trouble with reflection, so I'm a massive fan of journaling, and as a neuropsychologist, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's so good for your brain. But I think if you were just journaling constantly the same thing, if you're just free writing the same thing, you're going over and over and over the same arguments, or, oh, I feel really unhappy about this, I feel really distressed about this. There comes a point where that's not helpful, and it's going to make you feel a bit low in mood. It's going to make you feel trapped in that negativity cycle. Whereas a little prompt, a little direction for your reflection. So something like, what am I proud of myself for doing in that situation? What did I do really well in that situation? If I was telling that story and it had a happier ending for me, what would I want that story to read like? How would I want to share that with someone else? If I had to rate myself out of 10 for that experience and how well I held my own, what score would I give myself? So it's really about finding those prompts that nudge you out of just getting caught up in the negativity, because it's so easy to just sit there and think, I wish I'd said this. Oh, I wish I'd said that. Oh, I can't believe they said that. Oh, I'm really angry with them. And it's like, okay, if you're really angry with them, what do you need to do to move on? What do you need to do to let go of this anger? What can you do to protect yourself from that anger? Because you're allowed to be angry with people, but what can you do to stop that hurting you? So it's those kinds of reflections of just things that lift you out of getting stuck in that cycle of just ruminating on the same thing again and again and again and just feeling really negative as a result. So that's just turn towards the positive. It just gets your brain into a slightly more problem-solving space, but also a more positive, reflective space.
Yeah, and that's really useful. Thank you. And you just reminded me, I even just made a note for myself to get my journal back out, because I realized I haven't done it for a few weeks, and I've noticed how I feel like there's lots of things going on in my brain and I just need to get them out. And unless I take a moment out to do that, I was doing it through the summer quite regularly, actually, and I felt the benefits. And this leads on to my next question, because when I was doing my journaling, I'd get up in the morning and I'd try and sit in the garden for 10 minutes when the sunrise, because I'd read how good that natural sunlight is for our energy throughout the day and helping me to sleep. So for this next question, obviously this time of year, I'm usually been awake for a little while before the sun actually comes up now, because I'm an early riser. But so for people in the UK and anyone listening to this podcast, what 2 or 3 simple practices could people start to do to make the most of the less light at this time of year to help resist or reduce the impact of missing out on that sunlight?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the daylight thing is problematic for so many people and we struggle with that lack of light. So this is not an ad. I feel like I have to say that these days, but I really recommend a sunrise sunset clock. So I have an alarm clock that mimics a sunrise and mimics a sunset. And that utilizes a daylight bulb. So it sort of mimics this natural sunrise, but it brings with it this real elevation in mood. So it was one of the things that I bought to help me manage my SAD. I have one in my office. I have one in my bedroom. We have one downstairs. We just have them everywhere to sort of mimic these daylight hours. And it's also really useful if you've got some tricky cognitive, heavy cognitive work that you need to do, or a really difficult report to write, or you're just in the middle of some really difficult work. Having a daylight bulb actually helps you think more clearly. So it's kind of faking it for your brain. Your brain thinks it's in full sun mode, so that it's able to kind of think quickly and problem solve and all the rest of it. So utilizing these tools that are available, I think, is really useful. I think on the flip side of that, changing your routine slightly. So if you typically went out into the garden and sort of took 10 minutes for yourself, it's, can I find a cozy spot and put a soft lamp on and just journal? Well, the alternative is I pick up my phone and I'm straight into my emails, or I'm straight into social media. It's almost, what can I replace? Because that's a really beautiful morning ritual. And as you say, you felt the benefit in your brain, right? It's almost like literal brain washing, as in you're just washing out all the nonsense from your brain. You can start your day afresh. And I think there's, how do I replicate that in a season that isn't going to encourage me to go and sit outside in the dark and the cold? So can I find a little cozy retreat corner in my home where I can just take my journal and a coffee and just start my day gently? Can I replace these rituals? Because this is what I mean about seasonal adjustments. You don't have to change your whole routine for the whole year, but you do have to make space for winter. And so that journaling practice is a great example, because it's fallen by the wayside because the weather's changed. And so that ritual is no longer available to you, but it could be available in another form. And it doesn't mean you have to give up the time in the garden journaling, but just for this season, you might want to make a different change. So I think those changes in being able to support yourself to find a way to engage with the thing that was giving you the most value, but in a seasonal way, is really powerful.
It's crazy, isn't it, really? Because the light was only probably one part of the benefit. The rest of the benefit was doing the actual activity. And that's interesting. And just for, obviously, as a society, we're a lot more cynical and cautious, and we don't have as much trust generally as we once did, because, there's been some cases where people have been let down and you can't always believe everything you read. So for anyone that might be a bit cynical about mimicking light, there is scientific evidence to show that they do help.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a slight difference between the sunrise sunset lights and the SAD lamp, as they're called, or SAD lamp. So a SAD lamp is a treatment lamp. So that's for light therapy treatment, specifically for SAD. But it is effectively a very, very bright light that mimics daylight, and you sit in front of it for maybe 20, 25 minutes in the morning, maybe again in the afternoon. And you don't have to just sit there and do nothing. One just sits at the side of my desk. So whilst I'm working, it's on in the morning. But there's a huge amount of evidence base that supports those. And it's part of the NICE guidance recommended treatment for seasonal affective disorder. It's what the NHS recommends as a pathway of treatment. And also people like the Seasonal Affective Disorder Association recommend light therapy and those lamps. So there is a huge evidence base behind them. Two things I'd say about that. That's slightly different from a sunrise sunset alarm clock, because they are there to mimic the sunrise and sunset rather than have the treatment. So they are not nearly as bright, but they do still utilize a daylight bulb. So you're still getting the same effect, but not at a treatment dose necessarily. But people do report massive uplift in their mood. They sleep better and more soundly. They sleep deeper and for longer, which is always a nice side effect of any treatment. But also they wake up feeling a lot more refreshed. They wake up naturally rather than aggressively to their alarm tone. And the research would say that people are waking up feeling more positive in mood, but also that their mood is a bit more resilient. So they wake up feeling better and they're more likely to keep hold of that good mood, even if the day doesn't quite pan out. What I will say, and again, not an ad, is you can buy really cheap versions of these things. And it's not that they're really expensive. So certainly none of my stuff was very expensive to buy at all, but it was proper, accredited. It's been tested, it's been proven, it's with a good brand, it's with a trustworthy recommended brand that a specialist recommended to me, rather than a 10 quid version off some cheap website. So I do think there are benefits to making that investment in your health. But also, if you do buy a 10 quid clock from Amazon and then it doesn't work for you, it's probably the clock rather than the fact that the lights don't work in general.
Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, so the next question is kind of about people listening to this who are thinking, I'd love to do all this, but don't feel like I have the time. So, they're juggling work, parenting, life, or even in a high pressure role. So is there any advice that you can help those people? Because I'm sure this comes up quite a lot, I'd love to do all that, but when am I going to find the time? So any tips on that would probably be very well received.
Yeah, definitely. So this isn't a popular answer with people, but people do have the time, because statistically your social media use, your screen use over winter goes up so dramatically. It's astonishing. And so across the season, you can spend something like an extra 6 to 8 days on your phone because of the change in weather and because you're inside and because you're doing things. And so people often do have the time, but also it's seeing these as tiny seasonal adjustments that you weave throughout your day. So a bit like with my SAD lamp, it's next to me on my desk whilst I work. I'd be doing that work anyway. So it's not costing me anything in terms of time or energy. It's just a different lamp that's on during the day. So it's finding things that you can weave into your practice. If you don't have time to journal, but you notice that your thoughts are spiraling and they're a bit stuck in the rumination, just putting in an alternative thought okay, I'm noticing I'm thinking about this argument with, my partner a lot. What do we agree on? What did we do really well? How have we resolved arguments in the past? It's just putting those thoughts in. So maybe you don't have time to sit down and journal it all out, but you can still change your thought pattern. So I think it's really important to not see them as massive seasonal adjustments, but also to think, what am I gaining in doing these things rather than what am I giving up? So I talk in the book, we have this revenge bedtime procrastination problem where we delay going to bed because we're taking revenge on our busy schedules. And we think, no, the evening is my time. I'm going to stay up late, even though we know it's not going to serve us well. we think, no, I'm going to stay up late, I'm going to watch an extra episode, or I'm going to scroll for a bit longer because this is my time. And actually, what you'd be far better off doing is going, this is my time and I'm going to prioritize my health and well-being. So I'm going to go to bed an hour earlier and just get the rest that I need. And often it is about going to bed earlier to get the rest in winter, because unfortunately our schedules don't change. So I would love to see schools and workplaces live more seasonally and make that adjustment more seasonally, so that they can change drop-off times, change commute times, so that we'd all just be working in a way that works with the world around us. But in the absence of massive societal overhaul, I think we can make those adjustments. And it could be just for a few weeks of the year, you go to bed a bit earlier, you sacrifice, if you like, your screen time, and you go to bed a bit earlier and you benefit from extra rest, which is going to support your mood, your immune system, everything that you would want to be boosted over this period. It's going to support, but often we don't do it. And I think the same is true of winter. Sometimes because we don't like winter, we're like, no, I'm not making any adjustments for it at all. So it's almost revenge winter procrastination, and actually just tiny, tiny seasonal adjustments. So not seeing this as a big change, but seeing it as tiny seasonal adjustments that you can weave into your everyday and work with the season to just make it a little bit more comfortable for you.
Yeah, they're making total sense to me. And yeah, you're right. People do that. I think I've been guilty of that myself a few times. Finally get my son to bed and then realize it's late. And I thought, well, I want to do something for me. So one of the themes in your book is talking about winter as a rhythm. And so you say winter isn't just a long decline into spring. It has its own rhythm, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Could you explain that a little bit more for our listeners?
Yeah, so if you like, it's almost 3 phases that I talk about in winter. And so you've got the sort of planning phase of winter, which is that early part of winter where we're really being encouraged to think and to plan and to plot and scheme and, make all our sort of plans for the year ahead. And it's not a rushed process. So this is not December 31st, back of envelope, right, quick, what do I want to do for New Year's resolutions? This is about taking your time to really think about what would matter to me this year. If I meet future me a year from now, what do I want to have achieved? What would feel meaningful? Because it's so tempting to just throw anything down. And I hate to say it, but you see people do it at work as well. Like, with their objectives, it's almost, I just have to get this into Workday, or I just have to get this into the system. I'll just put any old thing down and I'll worry about it next year. And it's almost that what would we really benefit from would be just having that time to plan and to think. And even if it is just in your personal life, even if it's not with work or what have you, just taking that planning phase. And then the one that I find the most challenging, and I have to be honest about this, is the being phase. So the middle phase is when you sit with those plans and you let them mature and you let them develop and you think about them and you reflect on them. And I really struggle with that because I'm a doer. So the second I have an idea, I'm halfway out of my chair ready to run out the door and get started on it. And the being phase I used to find quite frustrating. But I realized it was what nature was doing. Nature was kind of being in those moments ready to launch into spring. So it was kind of just sitting with the growth and the development, which can be quite slow at that time, but it was constantly moving, but it was just moving at a very gentle pace. And inevitably, now that I've embraced that being phase, where I just sit and be with my plans, what I find is that when I do eventually come to kind of execute them, there's a much better time to have done it. And I've got more energy and resource and time behind me to do them rather than had I charged in February and just gone for it. So I always benefit from that phase. And then the last phase is all about preparing to leave winter, preparing to leave this season to kind of engage with spring and think, what am I thankful to winter for? This charging pad of the year where I've slowed down and I've settled into the hush and I've made my plans. What lessons from winter do I want to carry forward for the rest of the year? And that for me is one of those real gifts of winter, where it's like, actually, when I slow down, I make my plans, I regroup my energy, I really think of winter as my charging pad of the year. And it's that sort of restorative phase ready to go again in spring. And of course, this is not living in an idyll, right? My work pressures stay the same, deadlines stay the same. It's not like I just go off to some retreat for, throughout winter. But there is something about mentally having that mindset shift of, this is my plotting, planning phase, this is my being phase, and this is my preparing to leave phase. Actually, what you then have is this beautiful kind of momentum throughout winter that stops it feeling stagnant and still as well. You're sort of building towards something before you start the next season. I think that can feel really lovely.
Yeah, and there's so many good lessons in here. I love the fact that it's not just thinking about what you're saying about what we can learn from nature and the seasons, not just as individuals, but as organizations as well. That's something that's coming through. And I thought, I love the idea of if we could incorporate some of these ideas at work, I think it'd be great, because we're all rushing around at this time of year to plan for next year, to finalize budgets. And we're still trying to, this year's job done, and it's really hard to think about next year. But if you could actually, we finish this year, then we go into planning phase. That makes so much more sense. You give so much more investment to what you want to do next, whether that's professionally, personally.
Yeah, and it saves a lot of money as well. It saves a lot of resource, both in terms of personal resource, but also financial resource, because if you've put proper planning in place and then you've put the stages that you need to achieve those things in place, and then you go to execute them, you're just in a much better position than if you just run at it, which we're all a little bit prone to do, I think, these days.
I might start to become an advocate for New Year planning. Okay, so we've got a couple more things in before we run out of time. But if winter is the season of laying foundations, how might that connect with creativity or growth? So, for example, if someone wanted to learn an instrument or had a personal project they wanted to start.
I think it's really interesting because I got asked this question quite a lot on the book tour, where people were asking, is winter a good time to be creative? Is it a good time to, start something or to embrace a project? And I think there isn't really a seasonal answer to that. I do find that winter is a good season it's a slightly more introspective season. That's often on the back of autumn. So pulling into those sort of darker nights, and it's a bit more of an introspective experience. So I think it can be good for self-expression. It can be good for tuning into our creative side. But I think ultimately what I would encourage anyone to do is look at their energy in any season and think, is now a good time for me to start something new? Do I have the bandwidth to do something new? Do I have the energy to do something new? Or am I just saying to myself, right, it's New Year, so I need to learn an instrument? It's almost, what is it that you're hoping to achieve with that? And I think it's really important that we go to that next level with our goals. We look at what is it that I'm trying to achieve and that I want to create. I do think winter can be a good time because there tends to be less social pressure in January and February, because we've just had all the chaos of Christmas, the festivities, and New Year. I think everyone's a bit sick of socializing. Purse strings tend to be tightened because, we've all had all the expense of the holiday period. So I think that can be quite a good time to just quietly reflect on what is it that I want to achieve next. But I think in any season, at any time of the year, actually, just tuning into where's my energy at? Do I have the headspace to engage in something new? Why do I want to do this thing? What's my desired outcome? And how is it that I'm going to build this into my day? Because I think it's James Clear that talks about we don't rise to our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And I think that's so true. So we could have this great ambition to learn a new language, but actually the system might be one word a day. One word a day, every day. I've got the little cue cards and one word every day, and I try and find a way to use that word. Maybe that's how I learn a new language, rather than I'll embark on, I don't know, A-level French, and then, I don't have time to attend, and it was a waste of money, and I'm never doing that again. So I think there's something really important about tuning into the energy and the headspace you have, but also thinking about why do you want to do this thing and what is your desired outcome from doing it? And I think that can be even more powerful in winter when we take that time to reflect, but you can apply that at any time of year.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And also, I think just being a bit gentle on yourself, because sometimes we can beat ourselves up because we haven't done something and feel like we're letting ourselves down. But that's really useful. Thank you. So for listeners entering the darker months then, which we are obviously well into now, what is one question that you would love each of them to ask themselves this winter?
I would encourage people to think, how do they want to feel at the end of the season? So if you take the step approach to winter, you've now got until towards the end of March. When that comes around, how do you want to feel? Because that will guide your thoughts, intentions, and actions for the next few months. So almost time travel and meet yourself in a few months' time and think, how do I want that person to feel? And then work your way backwards. So if you want that person to feel really energized and vibrant and healthy and ready to embrace the rest of the year, what decision do you need to make today to make sure that that person feels that way, that future you feels that way? Does that make sense? So you're almost doing a bit of time travel, but you start with that question of, how do I want to feel at the end of this? Because that's going to guide all your actions and intentions throughout the whole season.
I like that, because you're looking at it from a really human approach, like about how do you want to feel? Not what do you want to have done, not what do you want to achieve, but how do you want to feel? And then, I think that's a great, very wise answer. Okay, so just one final question really then. If you had to, and you might have been asked about this on the book tour, but if you had to distill the part of the book into one sentence or a couple of sentences, what would it be?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I would say that there are gifts in winter, and they may appear hidden in the dark and in the cold, but there are gifts there. And in order to see them and benefit from them, you have to be in winter. So you can't view it through your hastily demisted car windscreen. You can't view it huddled indoors with the heating cranked up in a t-shirt whilst you're peering outside. In order to really experience the joy and the beauty and the warmth that lies in our coldest season, you need to go out and engage with winter, because that's where you notice the nature. That's where you notice the growth. It's where you notice that actually winter solstice is the shortest day, which means every day brings with it a little bit more daylight. So we associate winter with darkness, but actually it's coming to the lightest parts. So I think it's really important to be in winter. So if it was two sentences, it would be there are gifts in winter, but you have to engage with winter to find them.
Wow, what a great way to end it. That's fantastic. Honestly, thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the PFP podcast. You can find useful links in the show notes and related articles on the PFP website, along with further podcasts. As always, please like, review, and subscribe. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.